What would you do if the very people who once discarded you suddenly reappeared with stories, apologies, and open arms? Would you run into their embrace? Or would you stare them in the face and say, "You don't get to come back now"? I was 9 when I learned what it meant to be unwanted. Not just unloved, unwanted. There's a difference. Unloved means someone forgot to show you affection. Unwanted means someone made a conscious choice to erase you from their life. It was a rainy Thursday. I remember the sound of tires splashing through puddles as my mother's silver Honda pulled away from the curb. No hugs. No goodbyes. No, we'll be back soon. Just the slamming of a car door and the scent of her perfume lingering in the hallway. I had packed a small backpack. I didn't know why, but something in my chest told me that this wasn't a normal drop-off at Aunt Linda's. That morning, she dressed me in my favorite lavender sweater. She even braided my hair. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she wanted to look me in the eyes one last time, without saying what she was about to do. She'd said, "You're going to stay with Aunt Linda for a little while. Mommy has some things to take care of." I nodded. I didn't ask questions. I was trained not to. That little while became a lifetime. I used to stare out Aunt Linda's living room window every evening, thinking maybe one day her car would pull back up. Maybe one day she'd realize I wasn't a mistake. Maybe she'd see that I was still that same little girl who danced barefoot in the living room and made bracelets from yarn. But no one came. Aunt Linda wasn't cruel. She gave me food, clothes, and a roof over my head. But she didn't give me her heart. Her affection was reserved for her own daughter, Claire. Claire, with her straight A's and ballet trophies. Claire, with her perfect golden curls and picture day smiles. And me? I was just there. A shadow in the hallway. An extra plate at dinner. A guest in the family photo. Sometimes I wondered if I was born defective. Was I too quiet? Too loud? Too weird? Too messy? Why did they decide I didn't fit? At school, I made friends sparingly. I had trust issues even at 11. Whenever someone got too close, I would pull away. Because if your own parents could leave you behind, who couldn't? By the time I turned 15, the word home didn't mean what it meant to others. It wasn't warmth or belonging. It was survival. I learned to iron my clothes, cook basic meals, and smile when spoken to. I became Emily Carter, the polite, composed, invisible teenager. But even now, as a 27-year-old woman living in New York, that day plays in my mind like a scratched record. The rain, the silence, the car, and the smell of my mother's perfume. I rebuilt myself, brick by brick, tier by tier. I graduated top of my class, got into Columbia on a scholarship, worked 2 jobs, lived off ramen, and built a life that no one could take away from me. I learned how to be strong, how to speak up. I refused to let their silence define my worth. But I never forgot. Then, out of nowhere, they came back. It was a Sunday morning. The sky was clear. I had just watered my plants and was sipping black coffee in my Brooklyn apartment. A knock. Sharp. Repetitive. Nervous. When I opened the door, there stood a man I hadn't seen in 18 years. My father. Older. Grayer. Eyes heavier than I remembered. And behind him my mother, holding a bouquet of white lilies. The same kind she used to keep on our kitchen table. The moment I saw them, I froze. Time didn't slow down, it stopped. All I could whisper was, "Why now?" They said my name like it hurt them. Emily. As if it was a prayer and a confession all at once. I didn't invite them in. Not yet. I wasn't ready. What do you do when ghosts show up at your doorstep, but they still have a heartbeat? They told me they needed to explain. That there were things I didn't know. That it wasn't what I thought. That they didn't want to leave me. But their eyes couldn't hide the shame. Their voices trembled with regret. And my soul? It cracked open, bleeding old wounds I thought had long healed. In that moment, I didn't know what scared me more. That they had returned, or that part of me wanted to believe them. Because beneath every scar of abandonment, there's a small, trembling hope that maybe, just maybe, you weren't the problem. That maybe they did want you after all. My name is Emily Carter. Born in Eugene, Oregon. Daughter of Matthew and Caroline Carter. But if you ask them, I'm not sure they'd remember the color of my eyes or the sound of my laugh. Sometimes I think they only remember the silence I left behind. Before I became a woman who could walk confidently through New York streets, I was a little girl chasing shadows in my aunt's backyard, searching for pieces of a childhood that was never really mine. The Emily I used to be, she was a daydreamer. She made paper swans and stuck glow-in-the-dark stars on her ceiling. She believed every family stayed together and that every parent loved without condition. But life taught her otherwise. Let me take you back to the life before the knock. Before they showed up again. Before the old chapters bled into the new. When my parents left me with Aunt Linda, they said it was temporary. That word is dangerous. It gives false hope. At first, I clung to the idea that they were just busy. Maybe work had taken them away. But months passed. Seasons changed. Letters never came. Calls were never made. Birthdays forgotten. I stopped asking about them after the second year. That was the unspoken rule. Aunt Linda didn't like the reminder. Aunt Linda was a structured woman. Tall, lean, pressed blouses, and tight ponytails. She wasn't cruel, but she wasn't warm either. I always felt like an extra puzzle piece in her house, kept in the box but never part of the picture. Her daughter Claire was a year older than me. Blonde hair, light blue eyes, perfectly ironed uniforms. We were night and day. Claire tolerated me the way someone tolerates a neighbor's barking dog, occasionally kind, mostly distant. I remember one night, clearly. I was 12. It was Claire's birthday. The table was decorated with pink frosting cupcakes and glittery banners. I stood near the wall, watching. My name hadn't been included in the party game list. A boy from her class asked, "Is she your sister?" Claire shook her head quickly. "No. She just lives here." Just lives here. 3 words that sliced deeper than anything physical ever could. But something happened in that year. I began to retreat into books. Books became my oxygen. In them, I found girls who were brave, even when they were alone. I found characters who had been through worse and still rose like phoenixes. A teacher named Mrs. Holbrook noticed. She was in her 50s. Red glasses. Sharp voice. Soft heart. She pulled me aside one day and said, "Emily, you have a voice that's made for more than silence." That one sentence changed everything. By the time I was in high school, I had learned how to disappear emotionally while still standing in plain sight. I blended in, quiet, punctual, polite. Never too involved. Never too open. But inside, I was a volcano waiting to erupt. I worked part-time at a local bookstore. That's where I started writing. Poetry. Stories. Letters I never sent. I wrote a letter to my mother every year on my birthday. None of them were mailed. They lived in a shoebox under my bed. The letters were raw. I waited for you again today. Do you think about me when it rains? Did you ever love me? Or was I just a mistake? At 17, something changed in me. I was done begging the past to explain itself. So I set my eyes on the future, that I got a full scholarship to Columbia University. No one in my family had ever gone to college, let alone the Ivy League. I remember the day I packed my bags and left Aunt Linda's house. She stood at the door and said, "Well, I hope you make something of yourself." No hugs. No, we're proud of you. But honestly, I didn't need it anymore. New York was overwhelming and electrifying all at once. For the first time, I felt free to reinvent myself. I introduced myself as Emily, with no qualifiers. No one here knew about the girl who was left behind. No one cared about the scars I carried. And that anonymity? It was liberating. I studied literature, minored in psychology. I wanted to understand the human mind, maybe so I could finally understand mine. During my sophomore year, I met Hannah. She was bold, loud, messy, and beautiful. She became the sister I never had. She asked me once, "Why don't you ever talk about your parents?" I shrugged. "They didn't want me," I replied flatly. She didn't push. But she did squeeze my hand under the table. And that was enough. I worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. I sold handmade journals on Etsy, tutored kids in writing, and managed the front desk at a publishing house. I was tired, always. But I was building something that no one could take away. Now, at 27, I live in a small Brooklyn apartment with exposed brick walls and a window that lets in the perfect morning light. I have my own editing business. I help aspiring authors tell their stories, because for so long, I wasn't allowed to tell mine. I drink too much coffee, overwater my succulents, and cry during sad commercials. I keep my circle small, but it's mine. I thought I had outrun the past. But trauma is sticky. It clings to the quiet moments. When my parents showed up that day, everything I had sealed away cracked open. Old memories came rushing back like a storm through broken windows. They stood in front of me as if they hadn't disappeared for almost 2 decades. As if I was supposed to be okay. As if time heals everything. But time doesn't heal abandonment. It just teaches you how to walk without limping. And yet, a part of me needed to know. Why did they leave? Where had they gone?
Why now?
And most importantly, what did they want from me? I was no longer that 9-year-old girl with tear-soaked cheeks and a crumpled sweater. But the scars? They were still there, hidden beneath the surface, quiet but present. And for the first time in years, they were beginning to burn. They asked if they could come inside. I stood there, fingers clutching the edge of the door, my body caught between instinct and curiosity. I should have said no. Should have shut the door and returned to the version of me that knew how to protect herself. But instead, I stepped aside. They entered like strangers. Awkward glances, hushed footsteps. Their eyes traced the photographs on the walls, the books stacked by the window, the throw blanket folded neatly on the couch, like tourists in a life that was no longer theirs. I offered them tea out of reflex. Caroline, my mother, held her cup with both hands, as if it was anchoring her to the moment. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. I folded my arms and leaned against the wall. "Maybe start where you left me." The silence that followed was thick. Matthew, my father, cleared his throat. "Emily, we were wrong. What we did, leaving you, it wasn't your fault." I scoffed. "I know that." Caroline looked down. "We were young. We made mistakes. I had postpartum depression after you were born. I didn't even know what was happening to me. I felt like I was drowning every day." "And you thought the solution was to disappear?" I snapped. 18 years. No calls. No letters. No effort. That's not postpartum. That's abandonment. Matthew flinched, then added quietly, "We weren't equipped to be parents. Especially not after the accident." I blinked. "What accident?" Caroline exchanged a glance with him.
"Claire."
"She died the year after we left you with Linda." My stomach twisted.
"Claire."
A name I hadn't heard in years. They'd never mentioned another child. "She was only 5, Caroline continued, her voice cracking. "We were driving back from therapy. A drunk driver ran a red light." I watched her hands tremble around the cup. "We fell apart after that," she said. "We didn't know how to be anything after losing her. We didn't even know how to face you. It was easier to disappear than confront the shame."
Shame.
That word wrapped around my throat. "So, you left one daughter behind, and then buried the other." I should have felt sympathy. Grief has a way of distorting reality. But instead, I felt rage. Because while they were mourning one child, they'd chosen to erase the other.
Me.
I wasn't their daughter. I was a ghost, someone they could forget without consequence. The visit lasted only 20 minutes. And when they left, they asked if we could meet again. "I don't know," I replied honestly. "I need time. You don't get to rush healing after being gone so long." Matthew nodded. Caroline wiped her eyes. And then they were gone again. But this time, they left a wound wide open. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. 1,000 questions swirled in my head. Were they telling the truth? Was Claire even real? Why now? I pulled out the shoebox from under my bed. The letters I'd written to them over the years, all unsent. I reread a few, hands shaking. One read. "I got a 97 on my history test. I thought you'd be proud. I imagined you hanging it on the fridge like other moms do. Another. I got my first period today. Aunt Linda didn't say much. I cried myself to sleep. Another. Do you think we'll ever talk again? And finally. I think I've finally stopped missing you. But some nights, I dream you came back. And I hate how real those dreams feel. But now they had come back. And I hated how real it was. Over the next few days, I tried to return to normal. I edited manuscripts, replied to client emails, watered my plants. But my mind was elsewhere. Hannah noticed at first. You've been off, she said over brunch. Talk to me. So I told her. Everything. She didn't interrupt. Just listened, her eyes soft. When I was done, she said, you don't owe them anything, Em. But you do owe yourself clarity. If there's even a part of you that wants answers, don't ignore it. Clarity. That word echoed in my mind. Maybe I didn't need closure from them, but I needed to understand the story they told, the story that might explain my entire life. So I called them. We agreed to meet the following Sunday in Central Park. Neutral territory. I wore black jeans, a navy trench coat, and an armor of indifference. They were already there, seated on a bench near the lake. Caroline looked smaller in the daylight. Matthew held a folder in his lap. He handed it to me without a word. Inside were documents. Claire's death certificate. Therapy records. Old family photos. There were even letters, ones they said they wrote but never sent. One was dated the day after my 10th birthday. We watched an old video of you dancing in the living room today. You were wearing your pink pajamas and singing off-key. We laughed. Then we cried. We miss you, Em. We just don't know how to fix what we broke. My hands shook as I read it. They had been broken. Not evil. Not cruel. Just broken. And broken people break others. But the question remained, could broken things ever be made whole again? Over the next few weeks, we met a few more times. Coffee shops. Parks. Quiet walks. They told me about their grief. How guilt and trauma had swallowed them whole. How they were both diagnosed with depression. How they'd gone through years of therapy. How their marriage barely survived. They never had more kids. They thought about me every day, they said. I didn't know if I believed all of it. But I wanted to. Because somewhere deep down, the girl in the lavender sweater still wanted to be wanted. Then one afternoon, Caroline handed me an envelope. Inside was a deed. To a small cottage outside of Portland. My name on the title. We bought it 2 years ago, she said. We always hoped we'd give it to you one day. If you ever forgave us. I didn't know what to say. A part of me felt manipulated. Another part felt seen for the first time. But with every step forward came a backward slide. One night, I dreamt I was 9 again. Standing on the curb. Watching the car drive away. I woke up crying. Because forgiveness doesn't come in one sweeping motion. It comes in fragments. One piece at a time. I began journaling again. Not letters to them. Letters to myself. You are not disposable. You are not the reason they left. You are allowed to heal at your own pace. One evening, I visited Aunt Linda. I hadn't seen her in years. She opened the door with her usual cool demeanor. But when she saw me, she softened. You look like your mother, she said. I raised a brow. That's not exactly a compliment. She chuckled. Maybe not. But you've always been stronger than both of them combined. She sat me down, poured tea, and for the first time apologized. I should have loved you better, Emily, she said. You were just a kid, and I didn't know how to make room for you. Her words hit harder than I expected. All my life, I thought I was invisible. But maybe I was just placed in the hands of people who didn't know how to hold me. That night, I sat on the subway home, staring at the city lights. I thought about everyone who had failed me. But more importantly, I thought about how I hadn't failed myself. Despite it all, I had built a life, a business, a home, an identity. And now I was being offered the one thing I thought I never needed again. Family. But could I trust it? Could I trust them? It had been 3 months since they returned. 3 months of stuttered conversations, half-healed wounds, and cautious reconnections. And now, I stood at a crossroads, literal and emotional. A letter from the city council sat on my kitchen counter, unopened. I already knew what it said. I'd been selected for the Manhattan Literary Residency. 6 months. Fully funded. Mentorship under one of the most acclaimed editors in New York. It was everything I had worked for. Everything I thought I wanted. So, why was I hesitating? A knock at the door startled me. It was Matthew. Alone. I was in the neighborhood, he said, holding up a takeout bag. I brought your favorite. Thai with extra basil. I didn't say anything. I just stepped aside and let him in. We ate on the couch in silence until he finally spoke. I know we can't undo what we did, Emily. But I hope someday you'll stop expecting us to be perfect and just let us be present. I stared at him. His eyes were tired. Not from age, but from living with regret. You were supposed to protect me, I whispered. I know, he replied. And I failed. Every single day since. I've known it, but I'm still here. Not because I deserve another chance, but because I'm not giving up on you again. The words hung in the air, trembling with weight. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled drawing. A stick figure family, one with 2 tall figures and a small girl in the middle, her arms stretched out wide. I kept this, he said softly. You gave it to us when you were 5. We never framed it. We should have. Tears welled in my eyes before I could stop them. That drawing. That desperate wish to be loved. To belong. I had buried that part of myself so deep, and now here it was, scratched in crayon on a faded piece of paper. The following weekend, I went to visit the cottage. It was nestled between pines and wildflowers, with a wraparound porch and windows that faced the sunset. It didn't feel like a bribe. It felt like a peace offering. Inside, it was quiet. Empty rooms with wood-paneled walls and the faint scent of lavender. But it didn't feel lonely. It felt like possibility. On the fireplace mantel, I saw it. A photo I hadn't taken. Me, maybe 9 years old, holding a paper crown on my head. I was smiling wide, toothless and bright. Behind me stood Caroline and Matthew, clapping. I stared at the image, unable to breathe. That day, I had no memory of it. Had they sent it to Linda? Had she never shown me? 1,000 versions of my past were unraveling. And I realized I had only ever seen my story through the lens of pain. But maybe, just maybe, there had been love once. Lost, yes, but real. That night, I sat on the porch and dialed their number. When Caroline picked up, her voice was tentative. Emily.
Hi, I said.
I saw the photo. Silence. Then a breath. We took it before we left. You had just finished your play in the living room. You called it Queen Emily Saves the World. I let out a laugh. It sounded foreign in my throat.
Soft. Real.
Why did you leave me, Mom? I finally asked. There it was. The raw question that lived at the center of everything. She didn't hesitate. Because I was scared of breaking you like I broke myself. For the first time, I heard it, not just her voice, but her fear. The fear that came from postpartum depression. From grief. From being unloved herself. And in that moment, I saw her. Not as the mother who left me, but as the woman who had been drowning. I can't promise I'll forgive you, I said slowly. But I'm tired of carrying the weight of your silence. We're not silent anymore, she replied. And we'll wait. As long as you need. That same week, I made a decision. I declined the residency. Not because I didn't want it, but because I needed space to rebuild. Not my career. Myself. Instead, I moved into the cottage. Day by day, I painted the walls, fixed the porch, filled the bookshelves. And one afternoon, I did something unexpected. I called Hannah. Want to come visit me in Portland? I asked. Only if you let me redecorate your kitchen, she teased. I smiled.
Deal.
Life became slower, but more intentional. I started writing again, not ghostwriting. My stories. One of them was called Queen Emily Saves the World. A children's book about a girl who loses her crown and learns she doesn't need it to be powerful. Publishers loved it. And for once, I didn't feel like I was hiding behind someone else's words. Months passed. Fall came. The trees turned gold, and so did something inside me. One afternoon, Caroline visited the cottage. We sat on the porch, wrapped in scarves, drinking hot cider. She handed me a scrapbook. Your childhood. As much as we could collect. Some of it you know. Some you don't. I flipped through it. Photos. Drawings. Letters I wrote and sent to Santa. Even a lock of hair from my first haircut. I didn't know you saved these. We saved everything, she said. Even when we didn't save ourselves. I reached the final page. It was blank, except for a small note. For the chapters still to come, whenever you're ready to write them. I looked at her. At the woman who once let me go. I don't know if I'm ready, I whispered. She nodded. You don't have to be. You just have to show up. Later that night, I journaled again. Healing is messy. It's not a straight line. It loops and twists and burns before it soothes. But maybe love isn't about never falling short. Maybe it's about returning. Again and again. And just like that, a new chapter began. There's something I've learned, something I wish I had known when I was that little girl with the crayon drawing, desperate for love. Being unwanted once doesn't mean you're unworthy forever. Sometimes the very people who broke you are also the ones who show up with trembling hands, trying to glue the pieces back together. Not perfectly, not quickly, but sincerely. And healing? It doesn't always arrive like a sunrise. Sometimes it's more like mist, creeping in quietly, softening the sharp edges. I didn't get the childhood I dreamed of, but I got a second chance at understanding it. And I chose to lean into it. Not because they deserved immediate forgiveness, but because I deserved peace. To anyone who's ever been told they were too much, too complicated, or simply unwanted, let me tell you something. You are not a burden. Your story's still being written. The chapters before this? They don't define your ending. They just give it depth. Caroline and Matthew didn't become the perfect parents overnight. We still stumble. We still argue. Sometimes, I still wonder if I'll ever fully trust them again. But each day we try. We sit with the uncomfortable truths. We remember birthdays. We say, I love you, even when it feels foreign in our mouths. And that's what growth is. Not erasing the past, but outgrowing its shadows. One evening, I hosted a small gathering at the cottage.
Just a few people.
Caroline, Matthew, Hannah, my editor from the publishing house, and a local artist who'd become a friend. We played board games. We laughed. We shared memories. Halfway through dessert, Caroline stood and raised her glass. To Emily, she said, her voice thick with emotion. For writing her own story. For teaching us how to start again. Everyone clapped. But I just sat there, heart full, eyes wet. Not because of the applause, but because for once, I wasn't performing. I was seen. That night, after everyone left, I stepped out onto the porch. The sky was full of stars, silent, steady witnesses to everything I'd survived. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. The air was cool. The trees whispered. The past didn't echo as loudly anymore. To you, the one listening or reading, maybe you've been told you're not enough. Maybe someone walked away when all you needed was for them to stay. Or maybe you're the one who left, and you're aching to be let back in. Whatever side of the door you're standing on, there's always room to return. But returning doesn't mean pretending. It means rebuilding. It means choosing softness after you've learned to survive in armor. So I'll leave you with this. 1. Don't rush your healing. Growth isn't a race. It's a resurrection. And sometimes the most radical thing you can do is simply not give up. 2. Let your heart be loud. Even if it trembles. Even if it breaks again.
Let it keep speaking.
3. Forgiveness is a process, not a performance. You don't have to hug the ones who hurt you, but you can release them from the weight of your soul. 4. Build your own home, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And fill it with people who choose you, again and again. As for me, I still write. I still journal. And every now and then, I reread that old crayon drawing with the words. Me and my family. I love them, even if they forget sometimes. That little girl was wise, wiser than I gave her credit for. She knew love was never about perfection. It was about presence. So, wherever you are in your story, mid-chapter, torn page, or on the very last line, remember, you were never truly unwanted. You were simply waiting to be found again.
By them.
By life. And most importantly, by yourself.